welcome to the Community Centre. So this talk this morning is about examining the process behind building and harnessing the power of community for ourselves and for our businesses. I'm Laura Weir, I'm a journalist and creative director, and I'm joined today by Sharmadean Reid MBE and Grace Ladoja MBE. Round of applause for them both, please. So usually I'd just jump straight in with some questions, but actually today I'm going to spend a bit of time introducing them both, mainly because I was so impressed with the bios that I was sent. They're just full of amazing, inspiring moments in both of their careers. So I'm going to start with Sharmadean. So Sharmadean graduated Central St Martin's with a first-class degree in communications and founded Weir Nails in 2009. Now, Weir changed the beauty landscape by platforming millennial voices and feminist attitudes. In 2018, she founded Beauty Stack, a beauty services marketplace, becoming one of the first black women in the UK to raise venture capital funding. Beauty Stack pivoted into being The Stack in 2021, a platform that allows women to build their own communities. In 2015, she was awarded an MBE for her services to beauty and women. Grace Ladoja has been at the heart of youth culture for the past decade. From Skepta to the brand Supreme, from Nike to Fenty, Grace has formed indelible creative community relationships with some of the most pioneering, powerful artists and brands and audiences around today. In 2017, Grace founded Metallic Inc., leveraging her diverse skill set across music management, brand partnerships, and creative consultancy. In 2018, Grace established Homecoming, an annual festival and ongoing cultural exchange between Africa and the world, and her work was recognised in 2018 with an MBE also. In 2020, Grace established the Metallic Fund, a series of grants and mentoring opportunities for black creatives in the UK. Now, the American author Meg Wheatley famously said, "There is no power greater than a community discovering what it cares about." I'd like to ask both of you when you first discovered what you truly cared about and when you realised its power. Sharmadean, could you go first?
Me. Thank you all so much for being here. I'm so happy to be here with my two friends. So the first time I discovered what I cared about was when I moved to London in 2003, which is crazy. I'm 2 decades here from Wolverhampton. I absolutely loved going to hip-hop clubs because we didn't have them in Wolverhampton, weirdly, just had UK Garage. And I would go to the hip-hop clubs and I'd be one of like 5 girls. Grace would be the other one. And there were no women in the club. And if there were women, it felt uncomfortable. And also, I was 19 years old, so I was trying to figure out my identity of like, what archetype of woman do I need to be? Do I need to be the video booty girl? Do I need to be the backpacker hip-hop girl? Like, I was very much about, I don't know my place in this world. So that was the first moment I started to think about gender. Before I moved to London, I never thought about gender or race because I was so, in Wolverhampton, told I could do anything, be anything. I was very much surrounded by a very matriarchal family. And that's when I first started the Weir fanzine. So I made the Weir zine in 2005 while I was still at Central St Martin's, and the purpose of it was, how can I find a world of women in hip-hop, which I love, and shine a light on those women? So when I was 21, I interviewed a whole bunch of different women, rappers, artists, dancers, and put them in this magazine, and then we would photocopy it and give it to people on the street. And that's around the time I met Grace, actually, so we're like 20-year friendship.
No, it's quite similar for me, actually. I went to school in London, and I remember being about 14, and garage was in its prime, and everyone would be wearing like Versace and Iceberg, and there was a whole look and feel to London youth culture. I was obviously too young to partake in the raving, but I met Heartless Crew, and then they started sneaking me into the parties with them. So I felt like I was part of like such a pivotal moment in London culture that showed that music could be the vehicle for everything that people were into, whether it's the clothes or the lifestyle or, you know, the mutual interest. So that was kind of my first taste at 14. Then when I was around 16, I really started getting into like skate culture, because I was friends with like Lev from Palace Skateboards, and there was a whole scene, of a different scene, but it was also kind of fused by music. And being from like inner city London and being into like the Smiths or Depeche Mode or Talking Heads wasn't really like the normal thing to be into. So I found a kind of another subculture and a community that I felt like I could be part of, even though I didn't skateboard or I wasn't, you know, into like the other things that they were into. I was still part of this community, and that kind of grew my interest in looking at communities. So I went to study film, and I was like, I want to make stories about things that I like, things that are around me that people are not talking about. So I was commissioned to do a lot of work around that with like Vans, Nike, talking about subcultures in London. And that kind of grew my own community. And then from that, I started thinking about how do we now bring in another layer to that of empowerment? Because it's like we can be about the subculture and we can be about community, but how are we empowering each other? And especially from my own background, which is like really London inner city, how do we now use our platform of culture and community to create things that are important, like generational wealth, or, you know, those things that we were never taught. So I used my platform and my knowledge to kind of make my career about that.
I feel like you're missing loads of stuff out there.
What's that?
Like, take your mind back to 2003. There's no one had
Instagram,
smartphones,
social media, Snapchat,
Cortado,
Twitter.
avocado on toast, Dalston wasn't a thing, you know what I mean? And like, you even had a rap group
Yes.
at one time. That's when we met. You had it was so cool. Your group was amazing. Yeah. And also as well, I think what's really interesting about our parallel journey, but also you, is that we both had never been to our home countries until later on in our late 28 I think you were about the same age. So going to Jamaica and Nigeria for the first time, there's a whole nother community there, which I think you've just parlayed into an entirely incredible global community.
It's a movement, but I'm sure we're going to get onto it. That's why I didn't want to put it all into the...
No, it's good.
All the memories coming back, and I was like, do you remember when you showed your film at Vans under the bridge on Brick Lane? Like 1,000 people turned up. It was incredible.
So that, you just touched on it there. You've both experienced communities in the pre and post-digital age. How have your early memories of community as young women at school, just to take it right back, evolved into the community today that you've built around you? So if you think about how we used to interact pre-technology, for example, what are those values that you've retained, and how are you using technology to build communities?
Weirdly enough, I was a real... I didn't have a community at school. I was a bit of an outsider, like popular girl outsider. I would be the one who would go to the dining hall and sit on everyone's table on different days of the week. Do you get what I mean? Like trying to like be with the jocks one day and then be with the nerds another day. So I was a roamer, a floater. However, I always threw the best parties. And my first party was when I was 13. And I, you know, to your point on the analog, how I built community in an analog way, I was always very much into design. I pretty much do most of the design or direct most of the design for every single business I have. And I loved making flyers, posters, flyers. And I remember my first party, I photocopied a picture of a bird like 50 times. So it looked like a flock of birds. And then I went, Sharma's party, half term, there'll be loads of birds. And everyone came, and it's one of the best parties ever.
Oh, no, I didn't know that story.
I would say, like, what I'm doing right now is absolutely no different to what I was doing at 13, which is that I love being on the edge of the room, watching everybody have a good time in a space that I facilitated. But I don't necessarily need to be in everyone's business all the time. And I see loads of staff members here, and you'll know that, like, I'll do the panel and then I'll go. Like, once I know everyone's having a good time, I'm like, okay, my work here is done, and then I'll go and have a bath and watch a documentary. So I would say that community at school or college or even at Central St Martin's was not a thing. I had to make them always. But my community, my home life was very strong. Like, I grew up at church, massive Jamaican family. I've got like 70 cousins, maybe more now. There's always babies being born. So my familial community was super strong. So I guess what I tried to do in my later life is replicate that intergenerational family community in the businesses that I've built.
That's great. I think that similar to Sharma, it started at home. I had a huge family. Ironically, I have 27 siblings, but I'm the only child from both my parents. So it was like a low, you're around people all the time. You've got so much family around you, so you understand that sense of community and kind of belonging in a pack. But for me, I think that one of the most important things for me in college, I'd say more than school, was traveling. I think that pre-digital and technology, traveling was how I built communities. I'd be like, simply, I'm going to find myself in every city. Yeah. That's what the thing is. Someone that's like me, that's into the same stuff. So that kind of fast tracks you to the art that is happening in Paris, or the food that's in Italy. You kind of find yourself in a similar. That's the easiest way to do it. And then you continually build your community globally. And then you become a global kind of version of a similar person and a similar interest. And that was the easiest way to do it when we were younger. But digitally, you can still do the same thing. So I haven't changed the formula. For every single person I've worked with, every single project that I've worked on, whether it was Skepta, when we were building global communities for him around music and authenticity, it was just like, go to Paris, find yourself. Go to New York, find Rocky. Go to Paris, find P&L. Go to Atlanta, find the exact same person that's doing a similar thing. And then you become it's so authentic that community grows so organically. And I think that now with Homecoming and looking at, we're building a platform and a community about three things. Obviously, Africa, the diaspora, and the enthusiasts of a continent. And with that, you can find so many people like-minded, digitally. I speak to so many people online that I'm never going to meet. I'm never going to, actually see face-to-face. They're actually never going to make it to Africa. But through me and this community that we've built, we've kind of were able to exchange. And I think that was a key thing in, the analog and the digital comparison. Find yourself in everywhere you go.
That's really good advice. I'm just thinking about, you're both from big families, so you had that really strong grounding. If someone's an introvert, perhaps doesn't come from a big family, doesn't have that big community that they're born into, what would be some advice?
Ironically, I'd describe both of us as introverts and extroverts, because as much as I'm here talking, I'm like that person that just wants to sit in a corner, speak to one person at a time. I'm not really like that. And what you're talking about seeing everyone, it having fun and then you can leave. It's like you don't have to change yourself to, function. I feel like FKA Twigs is a great example of that. FKA Twigs, to me, is on some levels an introvert, but because she believes in her talent and believes in herself so much that no matter who she meets, whether it is like, Drake or A$AP Rocky, these are really big characters, she will still be the star in the room because she has such a great self-belief in what the vision that she's building, and she has values around it and it means something to her. It will come through. So you don't, and I often say that you do not have to be the loudest person in the room to get heard. Actually, more time I'm more attracted to speaking to the person that is not, do you know what I mean? Like stealing the show, because that is obviously a useful asset to have, but it's not necessarily the most important. So if you can just be yourself and be super confident in what you're doing, and it doesn't have to always be so big. I say to people, like, I'm starting a project which is about braiding. I'm not a hairdresser. I love braid art. I've got a little Instagram. But that's the thing I spoke to Jay-Z about when I met him at the Rock Nation brunch. It wasn't about my business or what I'm doing. We bonded because he was like, I like your hair. And I was like, oh my God, I'm starting this little concept. And I was just telling him about it. And he was like, this is so cool. It wasn't about the big things. So sometimes it's the little things that you're into that are more valuable than the big story.
I would just say as well that it doesn't always have to be about being at a big event. I think sometimes people mistake communities for scale. Whereas actually, I think micro communities are incredibly important. And by that, I mean, you know, the famous Dunbar's number of 150, like less than 150 people, of which at any time 10% might be active. To me, that's quite a successful community. Whereas right now, people are like, oh, I got 20,000, 30,000 in my community. It's not really a community to me if they cannot interact one-to-one without you facilitating. So I would say for introverts, the important thing is to work on cultivating your one-to-one relationships within the group. So it doesn't mean that you have to walk into a room and be like, oh my God, I'm overwhelmed, I need to talk to like 20 people or network. You can have one incredible conversation about the things that are really specific to you, and that is successful. My other tip as well, it's a bit random, but if you want to build relationships with people but you have social anxiety or introversion, rather than arrange to meet a coffee or something like that, I would go for walks. Because when you're walking with people, you're not looking face to face with them. I know this is so cringe, but does anyone get uncomfortable, like staring at somebody's eye across the table when you're brand new? I constantly arrange walks with people. So if someone says, do you want to meet for a coffee? And I'm just being a bit, you know, overwhelmed at the moment, I'll be like, oh, should we go for a walk instead? And not only will you seem way more interesting because, you know, got some London facts on the walk, but it means you don't have to stare at their face. And I find when people are side by side, you can have really intimate conversations because people are kind of saying it to the ether, not directly to you. So that would be my like little hack for introverted networking.
We've done a few walks and talks. Sharmadean we've both done some work together, and a lot of our conversations centre around this ideas of values and purpose. Very kind of overused terms in the business community now, but this idea of really finding out what matters to you. We've touched on it earlier. In very simple terms, I think, Shar, you might have some good advice about how someone can find their purpose and value set and identify it when they're building their community.
Yeah, so we have a 10-week how to build community program starting in the Stack. I think it's first week of April, and the very first session is setting your intention or your purpose around it. I think when it comes to community building, sometimes you get what's the word I'm looking for? You get held back by, but I don't have a huge, big vision or mission for this community. It doesn't need to be. It could be as simple as, I want to discover my Jamaican heritage. I want to learn more. Or it might be action-based. By the end of this community, I want to learn how to do my own self-assessment. I know it sounds boring, but we have a community in the Stack around Excel spreadsheets. It might be, I want to learn how to use Excel. It's actually called Excel and Memes because she's like, I'm going to make it fun. So it might be action-based. It might be purpose-based. It might be something that you want to achieve or learn. Or yes, it could be a big lofty vision. So obviously our wider community of the Stack is around gender equity. Like that will always be my life's work. And then underneath that, there are over 500 different communities in the app about everything from confidence to tax planning, because gender equity doesn't come from one thing. And similarly with your community, it can be, yes, I have a big lofty vision, which might be remembering Jamaican culture in London, but then what are the small actions or tasks that you can do underneath to achieve that? Then I would say you translate that vision and purpose into what the actual gathering point is. I really am not, when a community doesn't gather, I find it difficult to understand how that's a community, because we're human nature is in meeting. We've done it since the beginning of time. We've gathered around fireplaces, we've gathered for food, we've gathered for all of these things. So I'm really like, okay, once you've got the vision and the mission of your community, what is the frequency and type of gathering that you might have? And it might be once a month we're going to walk on Hyde Park, or it might be twice a year we're going to, you know, go and watch a movie together with a film club, or it might be every year we go to homecoming, because I know that when I go to homecoming, I know exactly who I'm going to see. I know it's going to be the best time ever. We're all descending on Lagos. Do you get what I mean? So it might be like, that only happens once a year, but it's the most incredible thing ever. So I would say, like, it all trickles down, but don't necessarily overthink it. Just be like, what do I want to achieve? And I think other people will also be interested in doing it.
Just to add to that, I think when you're thinking of purpose, which is almost like the hardest thing, and I say to people like this, sometimes you do take too long to try and work out. Some people won't find their purpose in their lifetime, but start it with things that are important to you or that you like. If I go back in my journey, and I always identify it for Sharmadean, is like, I've always been attracted to the same thing. I've been attracted to empowering people through the creative world to economically empower themselves. So if I look at how I did that with Skepta, he's an independent artist. He owns his own money. He owns his royalties. He owns everything. How do you turn that into becoming a blueprint that Stormzy, J Hus, Mabel, all these other artists that look up to you can, repeat? And that's that's the best thing we did. All the people that came after, look at Central C now. He's done 1 billion streams. He's probably made 50 million from music, in the next X amount of years, because he owns his music. That's really important. So that thread has continued for me now when I'm looking at my festival and homecoming in Nigeria, and we work with, I've managed people like Moa Lola, who is an amazing designer. How do you look at amplifying those people, sharing your knowledge and allowing them now to have that blueprint of empowering themselves? And, the thread will continue in my life's work as well, but it might not have been defined at the beginning. I might not have known when I started what it was, but when I look back at the thread, so just do that yourself. And someone said it, Princess Nokia, as crazy as her thinking is, she said, purpose is often found in solitude. So that means you have to spend some real time with yourself, looking at yourself, looking at your past, what you really like, what you really love, and just start with that. And often you can find your way.
Can I just add one more thing to that as well, which is like, once you've done the spiritual work of like, what is it that I'm about, or what do I stand for, really look at your life practically as well and be like, what can I manage successfully? Because the 500 communities we have, there's about 300 hosts, and every time the hosts overexert themselves, they're like, we're going to do a weekly dinner party. And I'm like, no. So really think practically about how this community is going to fit into your life. Because one of the most common ways that I see communities die is because the leaders are burnt out. We can't manage it. It's too much. This is a side hustle. It's not even paying me money. All of these different things. And I really think it's worth just taking a look at yourself on a day-to-day practical level and looking at that cadence of your week, month, year, whatever it is, and be like, how can I make this community sustainable? Because that's really key. And also, who can I collaborate with as a co-founder of this community? So many community leaders are doing it by themselves, when actually, make a little committee. How cute. It's like being at uni. Do a group project together so that you're not the only one shouldering the burden, because I think everyone can attest to the last few years being an emotional roller coaster. And some days you just cannot get out of bed to do that thing that you promised 100 people you would do, So definitely sharing the load and looking practically at how you run a community consistently. And anyone in my year is scheduled till December, because
I got a call from Sharmadean the other day. She's like, I just want to know what we're doing on this day. It was literally in 3 months' time. And I was like, why? She said, I'm scheduling my year till December.
I know. And I've done it because I know my cadence. I know that there's going to be a holiday where school holidays. Yeah. I know the half-term holidays. You know what I mean? So I just think it's worth zooming out and looking at what you can achieve practically as well.
We often talk about the abundance mindset as well. And I think speaking to that point about starting something on your own and being really open to sharing that is so important, because often we go through life sort of striving just, this is mine, when actually a community is obviously all about involving other people. I wanted to touch on your point about burnout and making sure that as the kind of leader of your communities, you're staying healthy, strong, productive. What are some of your ways that you stay on top of your kind of health and well-being game?
Where do I begin?
The bathtub.
The bathtub. The bathtub is the end.
Is that the end of the journey?
Yeah. You know, this doesn't just apply to community building, but I think it's if you have things that you want to achieve. I look at myself as a high-performance animal. That if I want to achieve all the things I want to achieve, I have to look after my body and my mind to be able to do that. So, you know, I'll go through large phases, for example, of not drinking, which sounds so simple, but I tested everything. I've been biohacking since I was 28. So I've cut out certain things. I know what foods work for me. I've done my blood work. This is all very long and boring, and I wrote an essay about it on your inputs and outputs. But thinking about my sleep, that's like so... Sleep is one of the ways that women's health is disrupted, particularly because of our cycles a lot. So knowing that I have the sleep I need, my friends... critical for my mental health, that I'm working on things that are purposeful, and that I'm really happy and thriving and healthy and eating whole foods and all of that jazz. Because the quickest way to regulate yourself to achieve the things you want to achieve is by actually working physiologically first. Then the second thing is delegating. I have no qualms about other people running things for me or with me. You know, like, we've worked together. You were shocked that I was like, yeah, go and do the newspaper. Once I've...
Because we did one, didn't we, first?
Yeah, but even with the first one, you were shocked because once I've communicated my vision, once I've signed off some key principles of things, then I trust the talent who is doing the project. And I think that trust is so key as a leader for not micromanaging. So one of the things I do in our community a lot is I'll be like, you're into this, do you want to do this? And then I give them a few tools. So a good example is we have a community called Founders Dining Club. So I set up this community, Founders Dining Club. A couple of people were into it. Olivia Simpson loved it. I was like, oh, Olivia, do you want this club? And I just gave it to her. And then we supported her on how she could get that club going. So I think when you empower others to create community, it's so enriching for everybody. And also, as I said earlier, if you're here at the top of the triangle and you're being a megaphone down, that's not a community. The community, each node in the network has to be connected with each other. So one of the issues I have with like communities and comments, it's not a community because they can't like really truly properly connect with each other by just replying to comments on each other. I'm like, how can I help other women meet other women and it's just through the stack and it was nothing to do with me? That's when I'm happy. So yeah, I would say I've had to force myself to avoid burnout by trusting talent and delegating and finding like-minded people who are on the same path and journey as me.
Just to add to that, I love that, but also it doesn't always happen. So don't be too mad at yourself if...
Which bit doesn't
You know,
happen?
like if you can't do everything you said you wanted to do for yourself, which is, I want to go to yoga at night at 7 a.m. I want to do this, this, and this, and this, because it's all going to benefit me. I think that as long as you can stay consistent with like 2 or 3 of those things, that's enough. Like if you say, I'm going to turn my phone off or I'm not going to sleep in my room with my phone, that's going to do so much for your mental health. If you're going to say, what I do with my son is that we get out of the house before 8 a.m. We go for a walk. That's the one thing I want to do with him every day. So like if I'm consistent with that, obviously, you know, everything else Sharmadean said as well, like diet, how you feel. But, you know, also I feel like as people, we're so hard on ourselves if
yeah, but
we don't
it's taking
achieve it all.
years. It takes a long, long time,
Yeah.
and it's based on what works for you. So, for example, some people respond well to not drinking. Some people it doesn't affect. Some people can't drink coffee. I've got so many friends who can't drink coffee because it causes heart palpitations. But I tried it and it works for me. What I teach in New Methods, if anyone's been, is self-discovery. The fact is, I know what works for me, and I don't wander through life being like, why am I so tired? Why am I so miserable? I know what works for me. So, like, understanding what works for you and having that rhythm of what works for you is key. These are the check boxes that work for me. What works for you? Because the most disempowering thing I think you can do for yourself is know full well what you need or what you need from your community and then just ignore it. You know what I mean? So it's not about copying my routine. It's about figuring out what your routine is.
No, but a lot of people say they feel overwhelmed by, do you know what I mean?
The pressure to be on top.
So I'm just saying, like, that's also okay not to be there, you know, all the time. So, but I agree with you on everything else.
You're both mothers. And I'm really interested to pivot slightly now to talking about Gen Alpha and how you think, or whether you've given any thought to, which I'm sure you have, how they will network, what communities will mean to them, and what the future looks like for the generation of community builders now and in the future.
Do you want to define Gen Alpha for everybody here?
It's the generation after Gen Z. The years,
so age
range now. So like my daughter Astrid is 6, she's Gen Alpha. Roman
12. Yeah.
Is still Gen Alpha.
Yeah, he's 12. My son's just turned 12. And I am not sure if this is going to be common to all Gen Alphas, and tell me what Astrid does. But what I've noticed about my son is he's borderless, genderless, brandless. He absolutely doesn't want to wear logos. I order 10 white T-shirts, 10 black T-shirts every year. He looks, you know, we're all merging together as a race, right? Everyone's becoming more and more brown. He looks like indeterminable ethnic origin, and he does not care about consumerism or brands, and it's so weird to me. And he'll be like, he'll be like, I don't want to wear bright red shoes. So everything I buy him has to be black denim, plain. He communicates largely through gaming because he's a boy, and I think that's what they do at 12. But he's definitely hyper aware of brands who try to greenwash, which is so observational for him. We were in the cinema and, not naming names, a big brand advert came on of kids' clothing that was supposed to be sustainable and conscious, and he went, as if. And I was like, wow, the fact that he even recognises that fast fashion and consciousness cannot go hand in hand was quite surprising to me. He's very sensitive, like most children are, to climate change. You know, he cried when Seaspiracy came on. And I just have hope for the future. He doesn't think about, like, the idea of nationality. Like, he doesn't think about, this is my, like, crew and that's your crew. He's like, we're all just humans together. So, hopeful for the world.
And your boy's young, so obviously kind of still finding the, you know, the direction and identity. But in a business sense, I wonder if you could speak, Grace, to that Gen Alpha, you know, the forecast of how they'll mobilise as a network and community.
I think what is different from us and them is that the power of technology is really present from birth. Like, my son knows how to open an iPad. Like, he has no idea. I try to avoid screen time, but he still knows how to get into my iPad and still knows how to, like, do, you know, like the Zoom, like things like that are so technology based. So I feel like that, how technology, how the trajectory of technology and what it stands for is so important in his life. Like, what technology will be in like 10 years, like how he's used to watching stuff on a screen. Like, you know, Roman's used to watching stuff on an iPad. We were used to watching stuff in the cinema. It was big. It was like, you know, you carved out time for things. Like, they've got accessibility to everything all the time. So he could be like, I really want to listen to, associates music with Alexa. So when he wants to hear a song, and we might be out in the car or whatever, he'd be like, Alexa, you know, and it's like, that's how he wants to hear music right now, you know,
Yeah.
and it's like so different. Whereas we would be in the car, the radio would be on, you wouldn't know what was being played.
Yeah,
He's
you'd go and find your
really
tape
clear about,
music.
my son can say songs that he likes. He loves Dua Lipa and he loves Burna Boy Last Last. He can tell Alexa that at 22 months, you know, that's what I want to hear. Or Wheels on the Bus. Those are his three songs, but he's so much sharper on what he likes and what he wants right now than I think we could have been, because the technology wasn't there to support it. I would have to go to the CD and say, like, what CD? Oh, Mummy has Mary J. Blige or Whitney Houston or whatever she had. And then I'd have to look at that. And, you know, at his age, at that young, like 3, 4-year-old, now he can be so sharp on what he wants because of the power of technology. So I think we saw it a bit with Gen Z, that they're very clear on what they care about. We're seeing it with Roman, where he knows what he doesn't like. So this assertiveness will come through, I think.
Right.
Do you know one thing as well that I've noticed with Roman? It's been very difficult for him to build community when his formative years were during the pandemic. So I'm really curious about the effects long-term of people who are going through puberty, teenagedom during those 2 years, when there was extreme fear and anxiety and they just didn't get to build relationships and bond in that way. So I sent him to a few summer camps and he made incredible friends, but there's no, I think there's a huge opportunity for children's communities, and it's something that I've spoken to various tech entrepreneurs about, please build children's communities where they're safe, trusted, etc. So you can be in a pod with other kids from around the world and, you know, be caring about trains or architecture or whatever it is. If you've got children or had children, they go through phases, you know, pirate phase, dinosaur phase, And I'm like, where can I get a community for him where he can just be dropped in to that? I actually signed him up for a school founded by the guy who did the school at SpaceX for the employees during the pandemic. And the reason I signed him up for that is because I'm excited for him to be with kids all over the world doing organisational team building exercises. So I think, to your question on how do we think Gen Alpha are going to mobilise, I actually think it might be quite difficult when until they're 13, 16 or 18, they can't access the social platforms that we access. And if they do, they're not necessarily using them to build community, but they're just doom scrolling, you know? So I'm curious as to how that's going to pan out.
It's a big opportunity there, I think. I found that incredibly insightful. Thank you both.
Thank
Grace
you
Ladoja,
so much.
Sharmadean Reid.